Hello, my friends. Thad Riley here, episode number 3 of the recast, redone, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I just about threw some weird 90s term out there, but we'll stay current in 2022. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the ThadCast. As you know, we have been talking about New Hampshire and we have been just digging in. I think in the last version of the ThadCast, we were really getting into that, but this is like version number 3. So if you're a new listener and you see old episodes out there and all this stuff like this, understand what we're doing now is we're digging in deep, not just into New Hampshire politics, but into our world today. And so my goal, my mission is to always bring in folks. And let me tell you, we have some amazing folks. If you caught episode 1, we had Jason Osborne, the majority leader of the New Hampshire House. We had Christopher Maidment, who I'll just tell you, that was about as fun gets. I don't know what topics we didn't cover, but that was wild. And we from Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for English. And I sound like Joe Biden now. This is going to go great. And so anyway, and tonight we have my friend that I've met on the campaign trail this year, and we had to have her as a guest, and you'll understand why as we dig in. And it is my friend, Melissa Blasek, out of Merrimack, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So say hello, Melissa.
Hello. Yes. Yeah. Now former state rep from Merrimack.
Oh my gosh. We will get into that as much as you want to get into that. But
Okay,
I will tell you.
I can spill all the tea. It's fine.
Okay. Yes. I love that. All the terms, by the way, are great, and all the feelings of it all. So, and I, of course, as we know, I'm a former candidate for governor, and I only came in 3rd. So not bad. And you guys, though, you had way more people in your race than I even had, but we're going to get to that because we got to know who the heck fire we're talking to. Okay. So let's talk with Melissa. Tell us, first of all, a little bit about your family.
Yeah, no, I am born and raised in New Hampshire, and I have been married for almost 10 years, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. And we live here in Merrimack, and
your girl could not be any cuter.
Oh, thank you so much.
She's just a little button. What is her name again?
Natalie.
Okay. All right. And as I do with all my guests, I go online and stalk their families a little bit, which probably sounds really great. And I just couldn't find her name. I went through like 174 pictures of Natalie. I'm like, can somebody just say Natalie looks cute? Look at her smile. Look at this. And I'm just like, can somebody just drop the name? And I was like, I'm throwing in the towel. We're just ask Melissa but I saw you guys at Simply Delicious.
Yes, that's our favorite place for a treat.
My favorite place too. And Alexa and Tammy are just phenomenal, phenomenal humans. And that bakery, we'll have them on one day. That's a different story for a different time. But I've been excited to have Melissa.
They are a great story. I call it the Freedom Bakery. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome.
Is a great story, and you should have them on.
Okay. I love them. They're just wonderful humans. So you grew up here in New Hampshire, and folks know I'm a Midwest guy. So I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. So for me, when I talk to people from New Hampshire, I think what a lot of people who don't live here, we have a lot of listeners out of state because I've lived all over the country, and that just kind of goes that way. New Hampshire is such a different culture. It's such a different culture.
We're a quirky state. Yeah.
Yeah.
People don't understand us. Politically, we're very volatile in a lot of ways. We go every which way. People can't figure it out. To me, it actually makes perfect sense based off the sort of the average New Hampshire person. We tend to be just leave me alone. I don't really want to talk to you. I just want to kind of like be doing my own thing. It's not to say they're not friendly, but generally speaking, they're a little isolated. And they do kind of run down, whether they understand the terminology or not, they run down the libertarian mentality, tend to be more socially liberal, tend to be more economically conservative. And that's sort of how we can be volatile. I think depending on which issues get pressed, which buttons get pressed on them, they can flip in either direction.
I really love the term that Bruce Fenton said, during his campaign, he would say, I'm a leave me alonist.
Yes, that is the New Hampshire way. That's how I feel.
And I am so not that, ever been that person. Like, I go into the grocery store, I know all these folks, the employees, like I just
Very
go
Midwestern of
through.
you.
And you what? What'd you
That's very
say?
Midwestern of you.
Oh, I mean, and I lived in the South. And when I lived in Jackson, Tennessee, the biggest culture shock for me was you say hi to everybody in the store. Every single person you walk by,
Right.
unless there is some intense, like, why did she put this on the list? I cannot find this brand and type of baked beans. My wife's done this to me a few times. I don't handle it well sometimes. I do a lot of grocery shopping, but I get overwhelmed, and I'll be sitting there laser focused in. But the employees, usually I'm just like, oh, it's like social hour for me. And I've learned some things the hard way in my arrival here. I really have. I want to talk to you though about what I read about you, about singing, about this career, this life that you've had around music. And
Yeah. So I always wanted to grow up to be a musician from the time I can remember. I went to Berklee College of Music. I performed for a while. I ended up creating a music school here in Merrimack. Actually, for a lot of years, I was teaching incredibly full time, kind of like off the charts hours, and I was doing it in people's houses. I went house to house, and then when I had my daughter, I started teaching in the house. I have recently kind of shut things down a little bit. I wanted more time with my daughter,
right.
yeah, no, I was hitting it for a long time. I had a little like jazz duo, and we did stuff. We did bars, restaurants, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So when did you, and I took singing lessons as a child,
Mhm.
with some pretty cool coaches and some folks. And so growing up, music was part of my life as far as vocal. I, I carried a guitar when I was in a band, and it looked like I was playing, but if you looked, you'd realize it wasn't plugged in. So that was kind of my prop at times to look cool. And so there was not a lot there. But when did you start taking singing lessons? When did you
So I
first really
always
get
wanted to
serious?
be a vocalist from, I think I told my mother when I was 4 or 5, that's what I wanted to do, but they won't teach voice lessons that young.
Right.
So I took like guitar and piano lessons when I was a kid. And then when I got to be old enough, which is typically like middle school age, I started doing voice lessons, and voice was my principal instrument in college. And, I was kind of a theater geek, and I did all that kind of stuff too. Which means I kind of did the whole gamut from like theater to jazz to, a little bit of every country, a little bit of everything. Yeah, no, that was always my thing, was voice primarily.
Yeah.
And I was primarily a vocal coach. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Yeah. I was in a few bands, but it never was me. I couldn't get into the lifestyle. I couldn't get into the going in and being the guy up front. That just never, like, the whole thing was not, it just didn't work.
That's why I really like teaching a lot. I did like performing, but the lifestyle wasn't right for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't see
Zero
myself being out
desire.
every night, and it just wasn't for me, and I wanted a family, and it just, yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That I'm with you 1,000, 1,000. When I broke up with my band, everybody at Liberty was like, what in the world? Like, they went to go see me in concert, and they'd replaced me. I gave them 2 weeks notice, and that was fine. And everyone was just like, what? Like, what in the world? And I was just out. I went door to door in Lynchburg, Virginia, telling people about Jesus with some friends on a Friday night instead of going to the concert. And it ended up forming one of the biggest outreaches in the history of Lynchburg. In fact, I believe it went on for 20 years.
Wow.
And that's what the night it started, was the night I was supposed to, and we just grew up to like 500 people, and we just went door to door and talked to people about good stuff about God. And it was an amazing experience. It was so much better than screaming my lungs out. We were doing covers of Green Day and the Offspring and always you two because of the Bono thing. Anyway, so I'm so glad to be here with you and past these stages of my life where I don't know what in the world I was thinking or doing, but I had to talk to you about your music background. So we've exposed this to people who know you a little bit but don't know. What is something else that people should know about you that they just don't know?
I mean, I don't know. I would say my other biggest like hobby besides politics
Yeah, yeah.
is I'm really into like cooking and health and nutrition. I had a really I was very sick as a child, and I kind of came to a breaking point in my early 20s, and I pulled myself back from the brink, and I got really into cooking and nutrition, and I
Wow.
just really find it very relaxing to cook, and it's kind of my hobby.
Wow. You would love Melanie because Melanie is just in her zone in the kitchen and she doesn't get enough time for it. And so she left us with a bunch of food
No,
um,
that's good.
and a lot of instructions on the calendar so that food is not screwed up when when an oven has to be turned on, heated up for 45 minutes or heated up and then put in for 45 minutes and then removed. I can remember details. It's fine.
Yes, yes.
So she'll be okay. She'll probably just text me tomorrow 3 times to make sure that I'm okay. Always sweet to me about it, but always like, did you figure it out? Yes, I opened the oven door.
I did that with I do that with my husband too.
Does he cook with you?
No. Early on in our marriage, it was like we thought we were going to split the cooking, right? And I found
Mm,
it so frustrating
mhm.
that to have him cook and have him call me 15 times throughout the process. And then I liked cooking, that it just
Right.
became I do all the cooking, he does all the dishes. I haven't done a
That's
dinner
great.
dish since he's gone right now, but if he's home, I haven't done a dinner dish when he's been home in years. So it's great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. It's interesting how you negotiate through your marriage different things and I don't really do much cooking, hardly any ever at all. She doesn't really like me in there sometimes.
Yep.
She likes I just go and I have a place where I'll go kind of chill and just lean back against this one counter and she's got clear pathways from the refrigerator and people are feeling this right now in their heart because they go through this in their kitchen when people are in their way and they're trying to make food. She has a clear path from the refrigerator to the stove to the sink
Yep.
to the area where she's going to be doing all
Yep.
of her meal prep.
That's
And
true.
that's
And I don't want anybody else to be in my way.
yes,
Yep. I
that's
feel that.
that's so good. I'm so glad you feel that. So you've always lived in New Hampshire.
Yes.
You've grew up here.
Mhm.
And I want to ask you this question because this is always fun. All right. So right now, we pull out a magic wand and we give you a ticket, and you've got time for you to go anywhere in the world right now for 7 days. Where do you go?
Oh, wow. Pre-COVID, I might have had a different answer for this. Now I don't know. I love Mexico. I've done a lot of traveling in Mexico. I've gone on some crazy road trips throughout different remote parts of Mexico, and I haven't been in so many years since way before my daughter. Kind of had to have a yen to go. We've kind of been talking about it. Our passports are expired, but I've kind of had a yen to go on a Mexican adventure, you know. Yeah, I'm thinking something like that would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah. We go to I've mentioned this before, but we go to Culebra whenever we can. It's 7 miles off of Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
It's a small flight and it is paradise of paradise.
Hmm.
It is everything. It's part of America, so travel is much easier.
Hmm.
And it's got the best beaches in the world.
You have to look into that because I don't have a passport right
Yeah,
now.
and so you don't have a passport?
It expired and I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
it expired during COVID, and then I just never did it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. But it's great there. All you need is your real ID anyway. So
Yep.
you can go there and if you go, I'll give you all the tips. By the way, stay at the Villa Flamencos. Make sure though it's the one that's the actual villa and not the hotel. They both kind of have a similar name to them. And it's you're on the beach
Oh.
and it's literally I think we stay there for 9 days and it was like $1,300 and you're on Flamenco Beach. You have a mile and a half of crushed coral, and the only people are small groups of folks from the mainland. So you're there with people from Puerto Rico who are way cooler than I ever will be, and their music is way better, and they bring each other drinks and they sit out and they just float in the green waters.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
It
Yeah.
is
I haven't really gone
unbelievable.
anywhere or done anything since COVID, and that sounds great.
And you have been slammed. You,
I have. Lockdowns
so
hit and I like turned into a different person, and I got in serious fight or flight mode for like 2.5 years. So this is gotta be an interesting transition out of it.
talk to me. I know I didn't prep this
You
question,
know, I didn't even read your question. Sorry. I do much
love
better
it.
off with that.
This is the first question I prepped. It was so good. I can't believe you didn't read it. Anyway, talk to me about that. Talk to me about March 2020. You're sitting where I'm sitting there dealing with school board mania here in
Yeah.
SAU 16.
Mhm.
For you, you had a lot on your plate right out of the gate. Talk to me about
Yeah.
March of 2020.
I mean, when people even first started talking about the idea of lockdown, I just thought that they had all collectively lost their minds. I could not imagine how a single human being on this planet could believe that a highly contagious respiratory virus could be eradicated in some way by a lockdown. Okay. And then it was like, well, they tried to convince us for a little bit, well, we need to prepare the hospitals, right? So we have to delay infection to prepare the hospitals. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess that makes sense, except that what happens when you allow government to take that type of control over your life, they don't give it back. So very quickly, the government started transitioning their message into it's about disease eradication. And then I was like, well, then it never ends. This will never end. I'm not saying that lockdowns don't work. In a way, they work. They do spread out infection. They lower the curve, right? But it's the same number of people under the curve. It's just you've lengthened the curve, right? So and in the meantime, you have serious collateral damage, which we have seen. And I knew it was like, I remember looking at my daughter's crib, and she wasn't even 2 years old yet, right? She was like a year and a half old the moment that the lockdown order came down. And I remember looking in her crib and thinking, I think that this could be the end of this country. It could be the end of human freedom. They will never give us back everything that we just gave up in literally a heartbeat. And I sort of determined at that moment that I would do anything possible to try to reverse course. And I didn't have any tools. I knew nothing. I just knew that I had to do something, because everything that did happen to us, I saw incredibly clearly in that moment. I haven't been wrong about anything that ended up happening, all the way down through the vaccines and the vaccine push and everything. I saw it all so clearly. And but of course it was really hard to push back against a population that was so manipulated and brainwashed by pure and utter fear. And at that point also, I'm not the type of person that can just take somebody at their word, right? At
Right.
this point, I've already looked at all of the data out of China and Italy, and I knew that this was not a pandemic that would affect anybody seriously under the age of 65, probably.
Right.
And especially that first variant really did not. We should have all gotten infected then, and we did not. And instead, we really waited to unlock as Delta came around. And Delta was significantly worse. Now, we can sit around and scientifically argue about why that was, because that has never happened with a virus before, that it actually got worse. But it was worse. And that's when we all got it, because that's when we decided nothing about this made sense to me whatsoever. And I started going to the Reopen New Hampshire rallies in April of 2020. We had another one very early May 2020.
Who is leading those?
So originally, there was a planning call with Health Freedom New Hampshire, which that's an established group pre-COVID. And I wasn't super involved with them, but I heard about them. I got on the planning call of that right away. And then
Were you a state rep at the time?
Oh, no. I had never been involved seriously in politics before.
Oh,
I was aware, I went to more events than most people did, but I
sure.
wasn't, I never been in office or anything or thought about running for office.
Yep.
And that rally sort of formed into Reopen New Hampshire, run by, it was for J.R. Hull, Andrew Manous, and Carolyn McKinney founded Reopen New Hampshire and kind of took over that rally, and then they kind of moved forward from there. And JR is an established activist. A lot of people know that he's a very established activist in the state. He has all the activism knowledge. He and Andrew were former state reps. Carolyn's a longtime activist in New Hampshire. So they did have a lot of know-how, and I just sort of bothered them enough until they let me on the board. And then in May, they realized this isn't going away anytime soon, right? They thought they were going to have this organization for a couple of weeks. We're going on 2.5 years now, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and we're still going strong.
Was it
And
14
decided,
days? 14
yeah,
days?
yeah,
Just
right.
slow the curve.
They decided that they needed to engage in the election and that we needed to run candidates and get the majority back in Concord. And that was the only way to end this. And so they convinced me to run for office. That was pretty much how that worked. And Leah Cushman is also on the board, and she and I ran for
great.
office, and we both won in 2020. And we had a really, really good run for 2 years, and we did do a lot. We pushed back against the governor a lot. I was probably the most vocal pushing back against the governor.
You might have been vocal.
You
You might have been vocal.
A little bit. I
It was
don't
great.
regret it. It might have cost me this election. I don't regret it. I was doing what I thought was right. And
Right.
I felt very strongly that we had lost so much ground in the war for liberty. And I was willing to do whatever was necessary to reverse course.
It's interesting what I think what everybody's listening to right now is they've put themselves in March of 2020. We're remembering the confusion that most of us felt. I remember sitting there like school board meetings blowing up on me, joint school board and Brentwood school board. And I'm on the policy committee and they're voting. And I've shared this story. I don't know if I've shared it with Jason or in the past couple podcasts. So I'll share it with you real briefly. And the first meeting was to take away, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, the power of the school board members and to hand it to the superintendent. And I'm an elected official representing my homies in Brentwood. And I thought, and I spoke out in policy committee, and we talked through it, and I explained this may not even be legal and all this stuff. And we voted, and I lost 7-1 on policy committee.
Yeah.
And then we voted.
Fear is very powerful for people.
And we voted as a joint school board, 30 members. And I thought, I'll be ready. I had like 3 or 4 people vote with me. And I sat there and I thought to myself, and I told them, I said, you have handed all of the power over from your town, your vote, your leadership. You've handed it away. And indefinitely, you've handed it away. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do, but I knew that one thing was wrong. And I think people are looking back, and the difference I think a lot of us have is we were confused. We tried to do the right thing, but we didn't know what it was. And we got bullied, and it was really hard. So when we hear from someone like you, Melissa, because as the book in the Bible, Esther, for such a time as this, we need to know about our warriors on the front line and how they were able to process things so that they could lead well, so that they could do well.
I think what's really important that people need to remember is, even if it was true, let's say hypothetically this was Ebola, okay? I have never downplayed the severity of COVID. Okay.
Okay.
It was a very severe disease. I have no doubt that it was a man-made virus. I think that they man-made the virus. I think that they suppressed the treatment.
That's
I
right.
think that this has all been orchestrated. Okay. But, and maybe on purpose, maybe not, but it's all man-made. Okay. So I've never downplayed the severity of the virus, but let's say this was Ebola. All right. They always like to bring that up. Okay. Humans cannot possibly eradicate a virus. It has never actually, human intervention has never eradicated any virus ever. And no, polio is not eradicated. Okay. We have never vaccinated our way out of a pandemic ever. And we have never manipulated the entire population in such a way that you could possibly eradicate a virus. The reality is that how we have always handled pandemics in the past is through the WHO pandemic response plan that we threw out the window. We threw it out the window and we never looked back. What we used to do with pandemics is that we would identify the vulnerable groups, educate the population. That's what public health is supposed to be there for. Educate the population on who the vulnerable groups were. Instead, we literally suppressed information about who the vulnerable groups were and told them that it was all equal across the board, which was not true. And then, and in the meantime, we allowed vulnerable people to keep working because we separated between essential and non-essential. That never made sense. We've never done that before. Okay.
Right.
And what else we did? We used to actively desperately search for treatment and make it available as quickly as humanly possible. No, not vaccines. Treatment. This is what we always did before. And we helped the vulnerable groups mitigate their risks. Okay. We did none of that at all. And people died. And I saw that all very clearly. And I also want to remind people for the next thing that comes around, because people are incredibly distracted by shiny things. Okay. Is that you never, ever give up your liberty for any false perceived sense of safety, ever. The government will not save you.
And I think we learned that, and that's a great line there. The government will not save you.
No.
When I remember is my wife worked at a nursing home. She still does. I'm not supposed to say nursing home, a retirement community.
Mm-hmm.
So she works at a really nice one. And I remember she would go to bed at night. And this was in December and January, where it was still over in China. And there were nights she could not sleep because she was worried so much about bringing it in and killing 42 people who are in their 90s, who are, in their last few years. That's our vulnerable population in this process. And I remember her just struggling for months.
You see, that's some lies also that people didn't see and that I saw right away. Also, this idea of asymptomatic transmission. Asymptomatic transmission is really not a thing, and it never was. I remember reading about the retraction of the only study ever that was an observational study that of COVID, right? This is where they got this whole myth, okay? And they used that myth to control the population, okay? And here was the study. The study was that in Germany, okay, there was a Chinese businesswoman from Wuhan who came to Germany. She met with 5 people. They all got COVID, okay? And they claimed to the researcher that she was asymptomatic, that she showed no signs of symptoms. However, the researchers failed to actually discuss or follow up with the Wuhan woman at all until after they published the study. After they published the study, they did follow up with her. And it turned out that no, she was on a fever suppressant. She was running a raging fever while she was there. So she was not asymptomatic at all. Okay.
Yeah.
And they immediately retracted that study. However, that study was used by our government officials to perpetuate the myth that you could feel perfectly healthy and be walking around for 2 weeks infecting everyone around you and you would never even know. And that is nonsense.
So let me ask you this. I'm going to use my magic wand. I love my magic wand. And I've just replaced Joe Biden with Melissa Blasek as president of the United States. Okay. Yeah, it would be fun. We would have such a good time. And by the way, I just want to have a dinner there sometime. So just when you do that, let me know, because I'd like to come up and see the White House, and that'd be fun. But what I'd like to know is, would you go backwards? Would you go backwards and prosecute and investigate and go through everything with this, or would you move forward and just fire
There
the
is no
people
moving
that were involved?
forward without figuring out what happened, and there is no moving forward without holding people accountable. And I want to be very clear. I mean, I'm not in office anymore. I can say whatever I want. I want to be very clear. This is not Republicans versus Democrats. This is us versus them. Okay. There are subversive members of both parties. Okay. And this is
Hmm.
a much bigger thing. Okay. Than just Republicans versus Democrats, because it happened worldwide. Okay. Now, yes, if I were president, I would be pushing for a repeal of the PrEP Act, I mean, immediately, without hesitation. The most
That's right.
damaging pieces of legislation were the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act and the PrEP Act. Every single part of COVID was made possible because of the atrocities in the PrEP Act, okay?
Hmm.
A doctor could literally shoot a patient in the head that had COVID and not be liable. Now, the point of that when they originally wrote that bill was, well, doctors should be free to try new treatments in times of emergency. And technically I agree with that, except when the government is subversive and then tries to prosecute doctors who do that by saying that they're spreading misinformation while allowing, crazy things to happen, as far as, using government promoted treatments that we knew didn't work and we knew were killing people. I mean, it's been a nightmare, right? Like, I know people who literally physically could not wear a mask, needed medical treatment, and were arrested for getting that. And they can't do anything about that because of the PrEP Act. So I
Right.
would get rid of all of that. That would be my number one and number two. And then, and any product that is sold to the public needs to be liable. I'm not a litigious person, but if you cannot sue, there is no check or balance, really. What are laws then, right? So I think, we definitely have to get rid of those. I would, the one reason why I I don't know, if the recording here, we were uncertain about whether we were going to take the Senate. I want Ron Johnson and I want Rand Paul to have their COVID tribunals. Rand Paul wants to have the COVID tribunal on the origins of COVID. I do think that's very important. I think it's very clear it came from a lab. I actually am very in touch with high-level pathologists here in the United States who claim that they can see that it was not only lab created, it was very possibly engineered in the United States and then actually created in China. Okay. We need to know this so that
So
it
you're
doesn't
saying designed here and then in the Wuhan lab. I think a lot of us have embraced that idea. And I think the majority of people probably listening to this podcast have moved past bat soup.
Yeah.
I think we've all pretty
Oh,
much.
the bats. Yeah, no, it's not the bats. Okay. No, we created, and what is going to be next? This had a 1% mortality rate and it almost destroyed the planet. Okay. What is going to happen next? So that's very important. And then Ron Johnson wants to do the COVID tribunals on the COVID vaccine. They lied in the data. That's just a fact.
Oh, they absolutely lied.
They lied in the data. They did not do the trials. I was screaming out there and they kept calling me a conspiracy theorist when I'm saying, but I actually read the study, and even the study with its we now know fraudulent data, even in the study itself, they never studied whether it stopped transmission, never. And yet they all went about and with all their COVID mandates and calling me a conspiracy theorist saying, of course it stops. No, we don't know that. Maybe it does. That wasn't the end point of the study. The primary endpoint of the study was symptomatic infection, not infection. And then it became very clear after just a few months that it had already mutated and it no longer did symptomatic infection. Now they're claiming that, it's for severe symptoms. And yet you notice that every politician who gets it also gets Paxlovid now, because guess what? It ain't working for that either.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so those are the things I would do. I would want my tribunals. I would like to hold people accountable, and I would repeal the PrEP Act and the 1986 Act. And I think I would reform the emergency powers. I think for a pandemic, a president should only be allowed to make a public health state of emergency for maybe a month.
That was an interesting conversation. I met with a state rep early on in my campaign, and we sat down and I said, I'd like to talk about emergency powers, and I had come to the conclusion that I personally was comfortable with a 30-day window and then a vote for the Senate, a vote from the House and the Senate from there. And I felt that that's where I was comfortable. I had most state reps saying you could go to 60 days and we'd probably be comfortable with 60 days. But I felt that if it's necessary for 30 days and you set a tight limit on it, that the process is, and so what I'm talking about here for folks who don't follow this too much is that the executives of each state, so the governors of the state and the president have this thing. They call them all kinds of, we call them mandates, right? We call them emergency orders. We call them emergency powers. They have a billion names out there, but it's the end of the day where somebody doesn't go through the process that they're supposed to go through to make something into what feels like a law. And that process here,
it's legislating by fiat, right? So it basically emergency powers are a time, and every state had them before COVID already. Ours had never been implemented before, which I think we were maybe the only state that had never implemented the emergency power law. We didn't even have it until 2001. And I basically say, well, we lived just fine until 2001, right? The state didn't fall apart, and it's over 200-year history without this, okay? But they implemented this emergency power law as a response to 9/11. And it essentially said that the governor or the legislature could declare a state of emergency, and then the governor had unlimited authority to renew that state of emergency every 21 days indefinitely, and could do anything he wanted by emergency power.
Right.
And I mean anything. I mean, quite literally, I was trying to explain this to people during the emergency. You don't have a governor, you have a king. Right. Okay. It doesn't matter whether he's been a benevolent dictator or not. You can agree with what he's done, because listen, I'm not going to say everything he did was terrible. He kind of had to follow the political will of the people. Okay. But what if you have a crazy person? You've now handed all this power over to a crazy person. And that is not okay. That is not what a constitutional republic is. You're supposed to have separate branches with checks and balances to prevent abuse of power. And so that was my main impetus for, that's why I wanted to run. I wanted to run to end the state of emergency and to reform the state of emergency laws. So that's that awesome. An abuse of power like that, even during an emergency, could never happen. And we actually, the original bill that we passed out of the House in 2021 was exactly that. It said after 30 days, the legislature must convene to vote to extend the state of emergency. And that did pass out of the House. And actually, interestingly enough, it passed out of the House with bipartisan support. It had a veto-proof majority. All right. But the only reason why the Democrats voted for it that time around was because there was another section of that bill that handed the fiscal responsibility of the federal grants back to the legislature.
Oh, yes.
2020, the Democrats had sued Governor Sununu because they wanted control over the money.
Yes.
And they lost because they said that the law was so broad, it gave the governor authority over that money. So to rectify their lawsuit, essentially, they voted for that bill. Now, once it got to the Senate was like, oh, no, we're not doing this. Okay. Right. So the House basically put it in the budget. Okay. And then we had another fight with the Senate where we got some of it, but not all of it. It wasn't 30 days anymore. It was, how many days is it now? It's 3. He can declare it for 21 days and renew it 3 times.
Right.
And then after that, the legislature has to meet they have to meet to vote about whether they're going to end it. And we handed over the money part, and there's a severability clause. There's a few things that we got out of that. That was in the budget, that was signed. That was not satisfactory to me, and here's why. The legislature should not be voting about whether to end the state of emergency. They should be voting about whether to continue the state of emergency.
Right.
It should require consent of both chambers to say, you know what? we are going to continue this completely unconstitutional, unnatural state of government. Because it's such an egregious state that we live in when we're in a state of emergency. It should take the majority of 424 people to agree that it is that much of an emergency, that needs to happen, so that the two chambers can't play politics, right? So Governor Sununu said he would sign that, told us that in writing. We put it into a bill. He agreed to it. We passed it to the House, we passed it to the Senate, and he vetoed it.
So one of the things that fascinated me in this discovery of emergency powers, and I looked at it from the New Hampshire Constitution and the United States Constitution, and I even took a gander at a couple other states. I took a gander at Virginia, Indiana, Arizona, a few other things. And I didn't get all the information, but I got enough. Is the interesting thing is you could run New Hampshire through a pandemic, and you could take away all emergency powers from the governor, not even give him 30 days, and you could still manage it. And here's why. Here's what I found that was so amazing to me was this. The governor since 1784 has had, or either 1784 or 1789, I don't always get my 1780s right, has had the same power. He has a singular power over the legislature. It's the only power he has. He can call an emergency session of the legislature to address a singular issue. Now, maybe
before 2001, when we passed this law, actually it was 2002, before we passed this law, that is exactly how we handled emergencies before.
That's how you handled it. And you brought it before the legislature, because what does the legislature do? They create, they write
They create the laws. They represent
Right.
you, they create the laws.
You got everybody in a room, and I know there's precedents, and I know what everybody says. But if you have an emergency, you can all work together in the room.
Yep.
Nail it
If
down.
it's a real emergency, guess what? You're all going to agree, really. I'm sorry, you are. If it's a real emergency, we're all going to agree. And, the other point I want to make, I often got this argument. Well, but it was a pandemic, so we can't be together. Okay. And my issue with that is, first of all, we could have met outside. I got sworn in on a football field. Okay. Like, we could have met outside, number one. Number two, we went through the Spanish flu with Congress meeting constantly
Right.
to handle the pandemic. Okay. When you sign on to be a legislator, I think that you have to know that there could be emergency situations like that, and you have to be okay with that.
Oh, so good. It's so good. And granted, we sit here, in hindsight is 2020. You had a clearer vision than most of us. And by God's grace, I didn't understand a lot of what was going on. And I was just basically in this fight with the schools, in this fight to get kids in the classroom, to get kids unmasked. Right. I wasn't even, I'll tell you, in 2020, I wasn't even talking about masks. All I was talking about was get the kids in person in school. That's the only thing that I had a singular focus to get all the schools open. And it worked. It worked in my town, and we did a good job. So, but I think looking back, we know that we learned a lot. We learned not to trust executives that want to live off of emergency orders. We learned that mandates don't serve anybody except for career politicians and pharmaceutical companies and people who have a vested interest. People like a Bill Gates, who is one of the most by what he does is just horrific, and people don't understand all the organizations he sponsors that are involved in world control and other issues that he has. So we could do a Bill Gates podcast another time. I want to ask you a couple other questions here. I need to give you my magic wand. I'm handing you my magic wand of politics. If you got to make somebody president in 2024, who are you leaning towards right now? It can be anybody. They're going to win no matter what.
I'm going to give my disclaimer first. Yes. That I think that people think too much about the next election. Okay. Oh. I think that people are too focused on the next election, and they see the election as an ends to a means in itself. And it is not. It's the thing that happens between elections that actually make a difference. Okay. So I also think that the federal government is irrevocably broken and can never be fixed. I don't think that there is a savior coming. I don't think that there is a way to fix it. Now,
Yeah.
Yes, if I were going to make somebody president, I think that Ron DeSantis is the best choice.
Mhm.
However, I think that he is better suited as a governor. On the other hand, he has a term limit in Florida. He can't run
Right.
again. So we might as well run for president, right?
Yeah.
If they can't use him in Florida, we might as well use him here. I think that states are far more important than DC. I think DC is a swamp and can't be fixed. But yeah, I think Ron DeSantis would be the best one. He's the only politician I see that he has a lot of guts. I think he's the real deal. I know people who know him, and like they say he's like a once in a lifetime politician.
Mhm.
He he's created a movement out of policy and not personality.
That's right. That's a
And
great,
and
that's a
that
great
is
point.
impossible to do practically, but he has done
Oh,
it courageously. And from what I understand, his wife is kind of the woman behind the man, and she really, I know people who swear that she wakes up every day thinking, how am I going to serve the people? These are true public servants.
I have
So,
heard that too from some people who've been connected down there.
yeah. So and he's willing to do hard things. I haven't agreed with every single thing. I think Florida's governor has too much authority, period. And I
Right.
understand, listen, I would rather use that to protect individual liberty, which is what he's done, than
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
Of course, I would rather it be done through the legislature, but he has a terrible legislature in Florida. So my dream is to pair Governor DeSantis with the New Hampshire legislature. I think that would be like magic. But anyway, no,
He'd be
I
good.
he would probably be my number one choice. I hope
Yeah.
he runs, and I plan on voting for him.
Yeah. Good. He might be my number 2 choice for New Hampshire. There's this other guy who ran for governor that I liked, but that's for another day. But I will tell you my number 1 choice, because I haven't answered this question yet. Without a doubt, and this is not going to happen. I don't see the path right now. But the number 1 for me, most Reagan-esque politician who wins, just is a winner, is Glenn Youngkin. And Glenn Youngkin has a 50% approval rating. Now that's an approval rating as a Republican in a state that has majorities all Democrat.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's also been relentless. When I say relentless, I will say this. He proposed the 15-week abortion ban in Virginia, and they were livid. They were livid. That bill is still not dead. And he goes in there and just goes and goes. I don't know how much energy this guy has. He will not stop. And I think it's Democrat, I think it's a Republican House, a Democrat Senate. I think that's the way it is, or maybe just straight Dem. It's still not dead.
Yeah, it's split. Yeah.
Yeah, and he has a different way about him. He's so smart on the campaign trail. He's so charismatic. And I feel like we need somebody where the Democrats can look at this person and say, yeah, but I get it. I don't agree with him, but I totally get it. He never does anything to make anybody mad. He takes terms away from career politicians.
Yeah, he is good at that.
He steals the terms away and he pushes back. And I've studied him more than any other politician. I heard somebody say, similar to what you said with DeSantis, but in a different way. He said that he is a once in a generation politician. And you will probably never see somebody with such a mastery of language, body language, and the way he impresses on people. He reminds me so much of Reagan, except he's 6'7". That's
I think give it a few more cycles. Virginia needs him for a while.
Yeah, I was actually just on the phone tonight with a friend of mine who's a school board member in Virginia, who is a Republican, and all the Democrats who are on the school board with him actually love him after being at war with him for 2 years. Good. And he talks a lot about that. And Virginia is a lot like us in some ways. It's very interesting.
They are, yeah.
All right, I'm moving on to this next one here because I had a couple really fun personal ones here. But they dig into this stuff. So we heard earlier about what had brought you in to politics was 2020 and all this stuff. But what has impacted your political career out of, just want to re-angle this a little bit. Has it been, what has been that driver? Has it been passion, just raw passion for this? Has it been certain gifts that you've had and said, this is how I can serve, there's some purpose here? Has it been your faith? What are the things that have really spoken to you and said, this is what we have to do? What is that driver?
I'm kind of an obsessive personality. When I get on something, I have to sort of master it. And I have to do it as much as one could do it. So when I got into this, that's sort of how I attacked it, is like, I have to do it totally and completely. I can't just kind of do it. So I think that's what kind of made me relentless. Now I've always been interested in politics. I think, I was homeschooled most of my childhood.
Wow.
I think that helped. My mother has a degree in economics. My dad was a poli-sci major. I think, they were kind of more traditional Republicans. I became maybe slightly more libertarian leaning Republican than they were, but they've kind of come along with me at this point. Then my grandfather was very into politics also. He worked in Massachusetts politics in the 50s and 60s. He was a big part of the civil rights movement there in the 50s and 60s. And talking politics, it was very normal in my family, especially because of my grandfather. He was actually an excellent predictor, political forecaster, probably the best I've ever met. I remember him calling me in late 2015, well before the New Hampshire First the Nation primary. And he says to me, Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. And I said, no, he's not. Oh my God.
We all said, no way. What in the world?
He said, no, I'm telling you, he is. And the day after the election, he called me and he said, Zio's right. He was so good. He was so good. So I think, being kind of, raised in it, and then my passion, and I just saw the loss of freedom for my child. And it terrified me so much that I was willing to do anything.
I feel you on that. And I think a lot of us, myself, Melanie and I just talked about this tonight in the kitchen. And I was telling her a story about somebody, and I just said, I can't do nothing. I look at the kids, I look at the life that these 6 kids could be living in 20 years, 30 years, when they're our age. What is that story going to look like for them?
I don't know. And I don't know when people wake up and see it. But we can go into this election here and what I think happened, because you would have thought that this would have woken people up. And I will say, I think it did.
That was my next question. So let's just flow into it. Because that was like literally
what we saw. I think the voting electorate, the average voter did wake up. So I, ran in 2020, I ran in 2022. I knocked the same doors in my district in both times. So now Republicans are operating off of the kind of more traditional campaigning paradigm. In a general election, we don't knock Republican doors so much. We'll do a little bit of a get out the vote effort at the end, but you don't knock on Democrat doors. They're never going to vote for you. You're knocking on the swing voter doors, registered voters, right? Who sometimes vote both ways, and you want to give them your message that they will vote for you, right? In 2020, I knocked those doors. Okay. I knocked those doors, and a lot of times I got the door shut in my face. I hate Trump. I won't vote for a Republican. Sorry. I still won. Okay. Merrimack had a very good year. We worked hard, but we had a very good year. Okay. This time, those same doors, I'm not saying like it was like the same group. No, is the exact same doors. Okay. Same people told me I'm voting Republican up and down the ticket. Okay. This is not the time. I got told this is not the time to be electing big spenders. Time for Republicans. Okay. I felt very positive going in there. That certainly reflected the polls we saw, correct? Okay.
Sure.
The number one issue at those doors, the economy, without a doubt. Almost never got another question. Economy, economy, economy. Inflation, inflation, inflation. Those middle of the road voters got it.
Right.
And they showed up, they voted. Okay. Here's who also showed up and voted that we did not expect to show up and vote. The never before voted Gen Zers. And they showed up en masse and they voted. And so, it's morning of, the election, and I was out there hanging out with some people with my signs, right? People who know the town much better than I do. I don't have very good name ID in the town, so I always end up a little bit at the end of the list. So I knew I've always known I really have to work, and I spent a lot of money and I did a lot of work in this race. And these people, they've been doing this forever. They've been in office in this town for years, decades, right? They know every Republican in town, and they're naming them as they're coming in the door. And I'm telling you, it was 2-1 Republican. Okay. And I'm thinking, yes, we have this in the bag, right? And then around 3:00, it all shifted. I look over and I see the same day registration line out the door around the building. And they're young and they were angry about abortion. They're yelling at us, "You banned abortion in New Hampshire." And we're like, "Whoa, no, we didn't." And they're like, "You're liars, liars." And that is what I believe flipped this election. I think that the Democrats had a different campaign strategy than we did. Their campaign strategy was not to look at registered voters. No. It was to look at unregistered voters. The type of people that exist that only maybe vote 2 or 3 times in their entire life. Okay.
Right.
They are very easily manipulated and lied to because they are completely uneducated about politics or economics or anything even remotely like that. They're not Democrats. Okay. They're not Republicans. They're not anything. They're completely apolitical voters. Well, non-voters really. Okay. And they pushed that message with, Maggie Hassan's $40 million. They pushed that abortion lie, and they they really targeted Gen Zers. And I got to say, the people that they really turned out in my particular district, but I think you could extrapolate this for the whole country. We had a bunch of brand new apartment buildings that were built in the last year, really.
Yeah.
Mostly young people. We did no voter outreach to that. And I knew when I saw the addresses coming in that we were sunk because we did zero voter outreach. My guess, if I'm going to make a really educated guess on what the Democrat strategy was, I'm sorry about that. I think that a few weeks ago, they went in, they just knocked on every single door in all these new buildings. Okay. And they said, New Hampshire Republicans banned abortion. You have to come out and vote. And then I think that morning and early afternoon, they went back out and knocked and said, remember, you have to come out and vote because we have to get those Republicans who banned abortion out of office. Wow. And here's where you go and vote, right? They had money like you would not even believe. Dobbs was the gift that kept on giving to the Democrats, and mostly financially. They fundraised off of it to an absolute extreme in a way that we could never compete with, not in a billion years. And so they had manpower and they had sophisticated operations. They had these apps apparently that they can send out text and make it look like it's coming from your sister. Like it connects to your entire list, your contact list. And then it takes that contact list and it checks it with voter lists. And then it sends these texts out like, "Oh, this is Aunt Judy reminding you, Republicans banned abortion. You got to make sure you go and vote today."
That's crazy.
This is what they spent money on. So Don Bolduc had, and you have to remember state politics is always downstream from federal. So
right.
They don't really pay attention to us that much. $3 million versus $40 million.
Right.
And a lot of that $40 million, yes, she lobbies, she's a corporate sellout, we get it. A lot of it came from Dobbs. Okay. And I know that you're really pro-life, and I'm not, knocking that in any way, shape, or form. I am saying that I feel very strongly that Dobbs was subversive within the party.
The conversation, the problem that we have with it, in my opinion, and from what I've experienced talking to people is, I remember I was on stage in the debate.
Mhm.
And Adam Sexton, who I will just say, I've had an incredible relationship with WMUR. They've treated me very nicely. They've given
Yep,
me,
me too.
they did 5 stories on me this year, which is crazy. I
Mhm.
was so grateful. And he said, obviously, the 3 of you are very conservative candidates. And as soon as it came out of his mouth, I thought,
No boy.
I'm screwed.
Mhm.
And it was my first time in a debate, and my brain was racing, and I thought, this is that Glenn Youngkin moment, and I can't do anything about it. I don't know what to say to recast myself. But right now, I'm the same as the 2 candidates next to me, and I've lost in this one single moment. And those terms, those words are so very much important. And my children at Exeter High School, 3 kids there right now, they hear stories all the time. We've had to have conversations. In fact, I have to have one tomorrow with my 12-year-old. And they think that if you're not completely, absolutely pro-choice, you're not kind.
Mm.
That you're not kind, you're not thoughtful. And this is the narrative that builds out. This is the narrative that follows our world for young people today,
Right.
with critical race theory, with gender whatever it is. It's got to, the identity struggles with gender, all this craziness that's gone on in these conversations. And these are the conversations that I have to work through my children. I'll sit there and say, listen, God loves everybody the same. That's the good news. God forgives everybody of their sin. You got it. I got it. We all got it. There's a path. It's all good. But what's the truth? What is the truth? And that's what.
Here's the problem is that people don't see that there's a lot of gray area. Okay. I think that this is the only issue where really both sides they kind of dig their heels in quite a bit, and they don't see that most people think that there's a middle ground. And that's where we are. There's maybe 25% of the population that is a complete absolutist pro-life, without anything. There's about 25% that think that there should be abortion until, the baby crowns. Okay. And then there is the other 50% of America that thinks that there should be something in between. Okay. And until you change the hearts and minds of people, this is a liability of an issue. And I hate to break it to the Republicans, but that's just a reality, especially in a state
Right.
like New Hampshire. And we have an entirely new voting bloc right now who was raised with this myth that abortion is contraception, and they are only voting on social issues, and we
Right.
fail on that. And so until we figure out what we're going to do about that, we will never have an actual red wave. So what happened with 2022, if you actually look at the maps, is that the red states got redder, the blue states got bluer, probably due to shifting of moving. Okay.
Mhm.
And the swing states stayed exactly the same as 2020. And I also hate to break it to Republicans, that is not a good scenario for a presidential election. We will never win a presidential election again with that type of map. Okay. Now,
Right.
I'm okay with red states becoming redder. I'm okay with blue states becoming bluer, because I think you should go and live where it makes you happy. Okay.
Right.
But these swing states, we were exactly the same as 2020, exactly, without, look at New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a great bellwether. We have the same governor. We have the exact same executive council. We have the exact same Senate. We lost 10 seats in the House. Now, how did we lose 10 seats in the House when everything else stayed the same? Okay. I can tell you that this was a New Hampshire specific problem, but we had too much infighting in the Republican Party within the rep races. And it was enough to take out probably more than 10 seats, actually, because we picked up quite a few new people. But the infighting of the incumbents, not even just incumbents, but the infighting created some serious issues. You can look at Belknap, and Belknap was the most Republican county in the entire state. We had all Republican reps last year. We lost a lot because over gun stock, and I got to say, both sides made a lot of mistakes with gun stock, and they fed right into the Democrat hands with that. because they got so buried into their side. They dug their heels in so hard on either side that they refused to vote for one another. Well, you know what happens when Republicans split a ticket? Democrats win.
That's right.
Okay. And that happened over and over again there. And there's a lot of other examples of things like that. You know, in my particular district, we were not a united front. We always run as a slate of 8. We're an 8-person district. We call ourselves a slate of 8. We were not a slate of 8 because there were too many personality issues, too many legal issues. And, you know, we'll see. I am doing a recount because I would like to actually see what happened in Merrimack.
I think that's wise. And a lot of Republican leaders that I've talked to have said, you know, one person in particular said, if you talk to anybody, tell them just to do the recount. It's $10. Do the recount.
If you're within
It's
1%,
$10.
it's $10, and I was well under 1%.
Yeah.
So you know what? Honestly, I'm not even looking to flip it. I am looking to see what happened. I want to see the ballots.
Yes, I understand that. That'll be great information, and I love information. I want to say one thing in response to something you said, and I get to say this, and because of what I've been through in running against the current sitting governor, my greatest disappointment, as I mentioned in the debate and throughout the campaign, was what we see going on in Virginia, Florida, Texas, Iowa, South Dakota. You have iconic Republican governors who are the leaders of their party, and they unify everyone behind them for the good of what they're going to do.
Right.
We do not have that. And the election is over. I don't have to support Chris Sununu anymore.
Nope, neither.
But it is, what is it, November 10th? Is it the 10th?
Yep.
Yeah, 10th. So, you know, I've got 365 plus 2 until his times 2 minus 2. Then anyway, all that math.
I think it's also interesting. I mean, again, I say infighting in the parties, what happened in the House.
Right.
And yes, there were rep issues amongst reps, but also the governor spent 2 years calling us the crazy kids down in the House and making us seem like extremists when we were not being extremists at all. We were just trying to rein in his power that frankly went to his head. Okay. And he fought us over issues that the electorate did not care about. They didn't care at all about emergency power reforms. That was his own ego, and it was nothing else. Okay. So, but he could get out there then and call us these crazy extremists down in the House. He never did that to the Senate. He didn't laugh at the Senate on television. You know what? The Senate kept their same numbers.
Right. And that was the moment for me that really pushed me in this race. The more I got to talk to state reps, the more I got to meet people. One of them lost his election, Greg Huff. Greg Huff was fantastic. There was an article that came out about Greg from the governor that was negative, and it turned out the information wasn't even correct from the governor.
We never understood why he was even mentioned in that, because it wasn't. But you know, the governor did this to me too. And I lost my handful of votes, most likely, right? Well, a handful of votes could have made a difference, right? And, you know, he had granite packs and of those negative attack mailers against me in the primary. That did not help me. Okay. And it gave the Democrats a lot of ammunition against me that, oh, look, her own people are attacking her. And then he gets the same pack to fund my Republican opposition. And then it just became that, and he was down here only campaigning out for Tim Magoo and didn't want to do anything with the rest of us. Listen, and he doesn't like me. I don't like him. There's no love lost, but he could have at least campaigned with the other people, right? Maybe I didn't want to, but like the other people, no, he just focused in on this one guy and gave him a lot of money and made it look like the party was only supporting one person in Merrimack out of 8. We looked discombobulated and dysfunctional going into this election, because we were.
And I will say this, I'll let the cat out of the bag, but I have believed for 2 years, I've been colossally disappointed with the efforts in March when it comes to our school boards, and it comes to the efforts from the governor, from the NHGOP.
So they can't get involved because it's not a partisan election.
They can, to have people talk to people, because that's what the Democrats are doing.
The Democrats
So-
do it, but the Republicans play by the rules, and the rules say that they can't. So I actually, assuming we were having a red wave and we were going to maybe even get a super majority, and of course I would be in office, I wanted to file a bill to make partisan local elections, because I think the reason why we have such low voter turnout at the local level is because people don't feel comfortable voting because they don't know who these people are. At least if you, because most of them don't have a website. There's no way to find out who these people are and know what they stand for. At least if you put an R and a D next to them and you make them choose a side, you have an idea of what they stand for. Instead, we get socialists who get to hide behind this like wall of union money, and people don't even know.
Well, there's signs. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when I was out, I spent the whole day campaigning. Every year, I go out to the towns where I know the most folks, and I go campaign for school board members who represent me and my family and our beliefs. And last year was the first time ever I saw something I'd never seen before. And they had their big sticks on their signs and they're holding them up. And you know what it said at the base of the sign on the pole?
No.
On the stick? Property of the Exeter Democratic Party. Property of the Rockingham Democratic Party.
Yeah, I know they are campaigning, and they're not supposed to.
What they could do, though, is to encourage them on a personal level. You are the chair of the Republicans. You know all the Republicans in the town. You can use your personal efforts together and your organizational skills that you have, and go promote school board members that are going to help us, because the Democrats swept us last time. We lost all of our conservatives, almost the entire majority here in SAU 16.
Yeah.
And either that, I may even bug that our majority leader, that good guy there. I may bug him about this potential bill that you've talked about, and maybe we'll talk offline about it, because
To be really clear and honest, Democrats will never go for it because they kind of lose their scheme a little bit. And we might hold the majority, we might not in the House, but expect a stalemate this year. Nothing's getting passed.
Right. And he said that
year.
today
We're gonna probably have a terrible budget. We're gonna have Medicaid expansion, and otherwise no policy is going to move forward. The best that we can all hope to do as activists on the outside is to play defense. And that's what I'm going to do moving forward for the next 2 years. Play defense, just make sure that the things that we accomplished over the last 2 years don't get undone.
How are you going to play defense? What does it look like for you now going forward? I mean, it's
I'll
early.
be the executive director of Rebuild New Hampshire, and I will remain the executive director of Rebuild New Hampshire. We will not be pushing for any policy changes. We will just simply be tracking any bills to undo our work and try to work to defeat them. We have a pretty enormous list, and they are pretty engaged. Activism essentially is making those calls, writing those emails, and showing up at those hearings and putting enough pressure on the politicians, because politicians do tend to bend to pressure. I watched it happen.
I am sure it has. I'm wondering if you've been to a lot of pressure, or if that makes you more fired up.
It's interesting being a trained activist. I feel like helped me as a politician, because I could actually identify activism tricks and realize that it wasn't real. So because you do feel it and you do think, oh no, because you want to appease people. You don't want people to be mad at you. You want to feel like you're representing your constituents, right?
Yep.
But activists know that. And so there are different activism tricks. So for instance, I had a bill. It was essentially in a back way going to ban town mask mandates. So towns only had their mask mandates because they were relying on this very loose enabling legislation. Okay. Because everything has to be granted to them by the state in a state like ours, in Dillon's rural state.
Yep.
So there is a statute about ordinances, things that a town can make an ordinance about, right? Noise, traffic, that kind of stuff. One of them says, in anything else that may be seen for the betterment of the city. That line has never been used to justify anything except for mask mandates. Okay.
Right.
So I had a bill in 2021 to simply strike that phrase. Okay. The municipal association is essentially, they're technically not supposed to be they're an activist organization, and they're very good at what they do. Okay.
Yeah.
So they called up every town councilor in Merrimack And they lied. Oh my God, they just outright lied. And they got these people so riled up. It was not even funny. And they panic called and emailed me. I can't believe you would put this bill in and you didn't even tell us. And we're not going to be able to do da 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 da. And I said, whoa. And so one of them I know really well. And I said, listen, you tell me what you think that you as a town councilor of Merrimack need to be able to do with that line. And I will floor amend my bill to add that in. So and she said, well, how do I know? I said, well, I don't know. Go look at the law. So she finally goes and looks it up and she sees this list of things they can make ordinances about. And she said, see, we need that because look, we can't even make ordinances about any of those things. I said, no, no, no. These are the things you can make ordinances. So she didn't even understand the law or how it all worked at all. And yet everybody in my town voted against my bill. And that's how many votes it lost by.
Wow.
And I went and checked with all these other people. I'm like, did you hear from your town councilors about this bill? Da, da, da. Nope, no one did. But they made me feel, right, that it was everywhere. So that's an activism trick, is to
That's brilliant.
People, yeah, just attack a politician in their inner circle so that they perceive that it's everywhere, but it's actually only right here.
Because that slows them down. They're not going to go out and fight.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, you have been fantastic. So my favorite part of all is always, before we do final closing thoughts, is our we'll do a 2-minute sprint. And these are random, non-political questions, probably, where you've just got to throw an answer out there, and we have fun with this. And you make the answer. There are no rules with the answer. Last time I asked Jason Osborne his favorite movie, and he said, I'm going to cheat and say 3, The Lord of the Rings. And then I think I just stopped and shut the whole thing down, because my favorite, I'm a Lord of the Rings nut job. I've watched them probably all over 150 times.
Wow.
To the point where I could watch the extended versions and say every line as they said it. And somehow I still ended up kissing a girl in my lifetime. So the miracles can happen. All right. So we're going to rapid fire for 2 minutes. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. We'll start with that question too. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh boy. I actually don't know. I've always really loved Gone with the Wind.
It's a good movie. You're on a desert island. You can only have one album with you. What is it?
Oh my. Probably Tapestry, Carole King.
Wow. Okay, I'm downloading it. Don't let me forget to download it. Okay, we already did the vacation. Where did you and your husband meet?
We actually met online.
Online.
Yeah.
Which service? Can you tell?
eHarmony.
Yes. Okay. By the way, one of my best friends got married. He's a director and movie director, and he's married to a rockette, and they met on eHarmony. Just for the
I don't even
record.
think it's like a thing anymore, but I did eHarmony. And I was only in college. My mom bought it for me for a Valentine's present because she was tired of like me whining about the boys I was meeting. So there you go.
That's awesome. All right. Next question. What was the first job you ever had?
This is interesting. I was a karate teacher.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got like way up in the belts and
Yeah. It's so funny. On election night, I saw Sean Tima. Sean Tima is in charge, essentially. He's basically in charge of Young Americans for Liberty, which is a PAC that supported me. And I used to teach him karate.
wow.
It's like such a small world.
That is incredible. Did you use any weapons or anything, or?
Yeah, sometimes, but I wasn't super into that. But yeah, he actually told me that to date, I was the only candidate recommendation he's ever given to the PAC.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome. My kids all take karate and they could all kill me. My daughter is 17. She's down at Liberty University on a visit, and I put her on a train, and she showed me her close moves if somebody tried to get her. And I'm just like, I don't need to get hurt anymore. You can stop now. I got a few more. I'm hitting to stop because this is too much fun. We're getting too much good information. Okay. So what's your favorite book? Do you have a favorite book? You can give us 3 books.
Oh my gosh. I really don't know. I mean, I'm a huge like historical fiction fan, and I love
Yeah.
mysteries. Like I've read like every Agatha Christie book. I mostly like to get into series like that and just read through them. I don't
Mhm.
think I have just like a favorite book. I don't know. I
How about
can't.
a favorite self-help book? Have you read a good self-help book?
I don't think I've ever read a self-help book.
Wow.
Never.
Good
I've
for
never read
you.
one. Yeah.
Good for
No.
you. Just
My
figure it
husband
all
was
out
really into
yourself.
them, but I've never read one. No.
Wow. That's fantastic. Okay. First concert you ever went to?
My
Let's
parents
say,
so when I was a kid,
yeah.
actually, my parents used to bring me to jazz concerts like all the time. The first one I remember was a blues festival. I saw BB King.
Wow.
Mhm,
Wow. There are
mhm.
probably hardly any people
I was
listening.
probably 10. I was really into it.
Okay. All right. And one story, one thing that happened that is unbelievable to you that happened.
Oh boy, one thing that happened to me that was just unbelievable. Um, I mean, I think it's kind of like unbelievable that I ended up being in office. Um, you could have never told me. I would have laughed you off the planet if you would have thought that we would even be sitting here having this conversation 3 years ago.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I've had kind of like a safe life here in New Hampshire.
I don't think many people are describing your life as safe the past few years, at least. I will tell you that's on the record, by the way. So, but that's, I mean, talk to you in 2019, 2017. What if we talked to you in 2010? Would you think that you would be in politics like this?
Never, never, no.
Right.
Not even
Right.
a little bit. The thought of it actually probably would have petrified me.
Yeah. My wife would answer that question that she was married to me. That might be hers because we broke up for 22 years
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and she
It's quite
was
a
not
story.
pleased. She was not pleased at all with me. There was no reason. I couldn't even give her a reason, so I just didn't talk to her. I just left. And it was bad. It was horrible. But
You have quite a story with your wife.
she's phenomenal. It's such a ridiculous marriage. I don't understand how it's so good, but it's she does a great job and it's just so good. And I'm so blessed, but it's good. Closing thoughts. Did we miss out on anything we should talk about with you?
Hmm. Um,
Are you into any sports, by the way?
no, I'm
Me
not a
neither.
sports person, and I don't
Kid
watch them
sports.
either. Politics is sports.
Does Natalie do any sports?
No, she's only 4. She doesn't really do any
Yeah.
activities yet. She likes to to do ballet, which just means that she watches ballet on YouTube and like dances around.
That's
Yeah. No, no, I'm not a sports person, don't like sports. I follow politics like it's sports. I like to analyze it like it's sports.
mm,
It is, especially in the United States, it's like because it's a two-party system, it absolutely is a team sport
right.
kind of situation. And no, I think we kind of covered all the election stuff.
Yeah.
I think I got to all my kind of recap points, the postmortem on the 2022 election. And I think, we as a Republican Party in New Hampshire specifically need to sit down and take a really cold, hard look in the mirror and say, we are not running a modern campaign system.
Mm,
We need to start doing that. We need to get some more money. The reality was Trump had the money and he refused to share it. Okay. He's the one who's been fundraising the shit out of the Republicans, and
I heard he's sitting on $300 million.
yeah, and he didn't share it. Okay. So we need to fundraise better, but more than ever, we need to start thinking about how we campaign differently in the
Mm,
modern world. And our state is downstream of the federal races. I think we also need to take a really cold, hard look at the candidates that we're putting up.
I could not agree with you more. As much I loved all the candidates, so this is not
Mhm.
specific for any
No,
particular candidate. We're just saying we got to look at the whole thing.
I think we got to be really honest also and say Donald Trump does not sell well in New Hampshire. And so a MAGA candidate does not sell well in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And we
So
need to
what
come
could
to
a
grips with
MAGA
that as a party.
and what could a MAGA candidate do if they were going to sell well? I mean, we look at a guy like JD Vance. You know, me being from Ohio, I know that used to be a very purple state. It voted for Obama twice.
Right.
You know, and it has transitioned into being a more conservative state.
It has.
Over the
But
last couple
we're
of years.
different. We're a very different state. And
But,
people
yeah.
did not like Donald Trump. I went and knocked the doors in 2020. And what happened with that race, I was not surprised even slightly that we went blue federal and red down ballot, because they hated Donald Trump so passionately that they voted blue at the top and then they switched to the other side.
We experienced that in Brentwood.
Mhm.
And I was confronted by
Mhm.
someone as I was talking about, you know, fraud and understanding what had gone on. And they said to me, "Do you believe there was fraud in Brentwood?" I'm like, "Do I believe there was fraud in Brentwood?" Well, let me tell you about Brentwood. Brentwood's, first of all, our town clerk is a devout conservative. I probably shouldn't say that, but I know what's going on because we only have, you know, 3,000 plus voters. It's not hard to see there was no fraud. There was no any games going on here in Brentwood. We had poll watchers back then. We
Yeah.
had poll watchers this time. We had a ton of new registered voters, just like you guys, just like all over the state. So we
We had all
had,
these new registered voters. It was a new voting base. We have to figure out what we're going to do with them.
we
Okay.
got to
'Cause
figure,
they might go away into the shadows. They might not. I don't know. We have to figure out what we're going to do with them. We need to,
we need a
we
new
need to
Republican
realize
Party
that, you know,
vibe.
at the federal level, like we looked at ballots today, like I heard people who are already at recounts, right? And they voted for Maggie Hassan and then they voted Republican for everything else. You know? Yeah. Yeah.
It has been wild.
It's
It has
a
been
wild state. It's a wild, wild state.
And I'll tell you what, though, I'm so hopeful about what's coming in 2024. I'm so hopeful about the future. You know, spending this past year, you know, campaigning. You've been campaigning, talking to voters.
Yep.
We understand the heartbeat of the state. We've just got to figure out with the Republican Party, with people who love our country, what we can do to do so much better in 2024. And the good news is and let me just say this too. We didn't underestimate. I didn't just underestimate the Democrats. I was blind to it all. I was blind to it all. I
The polls
refused.
were so clear. And the polls, I believe, were accurate for registered voters. The people who typically vote, who we would typically call for polls. I can see it at the doors. It all made sense to me. It all correlated.
Right.
We tapped into something new.
Right. And let me just say, with all of our new registered voters, because the way we're set up in Brentwood, there wasn't a bus that showed up in the parking lot. There was no Massachusetts plates.
Nope.
My people were outside. My folks were outside the whole time.
Yep.
They would have lost their mind and taken pictures and gone live on Facebook. There was none of that.
Nope. These are people who live here that didn't used to vote.
And kudos to the Democrats who had a plan. And now this time we'll just have to win everything in 2024. And we'll stay positive and encouraged. But anyway, listen, let me just say it has been a joy to have you on the ThadCast here. And I'm so glad we got you on right after the election.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed for you. At the same time, this next 2 years and I'm disappointed not just for you, I'm disappointed for New Hampshire because they don't have you as a state rep, but they've got you as the executive director of Rebuild New Hampshire.
Yep.
You are here. How do people best connect with you?
Probably right now, I'm a little bit in hiding right now. I'm kind of laying low for a little while, but you
That's
can
good.
always connect with me at director@rebuildnh.com.
There you go. That's the path. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me here
Thanks
today.
for having me. I'm glad we got to do this.
You are, I'm so thrilled that you came on here. And let me just say real quick. So you're probably listening to us. About 99% of you listen to us on your favorite podcast channel, whether it's Podbean, whether it's Radio FM, whether it's TuneIn, whatever it's wherever we're on nowadays. We are on, so I don't even know. We're on, I think, 120 different channels all over the world. And so I'm thrilled for that. So whatever you're listening on, that's great. Just so you know, I will have this up on YouTube and I will have it on Rumble. Hopefully, I think Rumble is all set up now, and I will get that one up there as soon as possible. So we do have video versions if you like it, but I know most of y'all just love to do whatever in your car, put this on and just do your thing. But we will be back very soon. We have a lineup coming that is going to be, hopefully, I don't know if it's as good as this one with Melissa, because she was a phenomenal person to have on, but we got some pretty good folks coming in the future. I don't want to name drop yet, but we got some folks that are really, you're going to want to hear their story and what they have to share with you about politics and New Hampshire politics. So, hey, thank you for joining me as always. Thank you, Melissa. I hope you all are doing so well. And until next time, may you be blessed. Oh, I'll have to go back and cut that. There it is. Okay, record. Boom. Stop.